This video contains mature content, including detailed descriptions of violent crimes, abuse, and other sensitive topics that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The content is intended for a mature audience and is not suitable for children.
The story of Aileen Wuornos, often labeled America's first female serial killer, is both a tragic tale and a horrifying chronicle of violence. Her life, marked by profound trauma and relentless abuse, led her down a dark path culminating in the murders of 7 men. This true crime narrative explores the complexities of her life, the psychological and societal factors that drove her to kill, and the lives of her victims. Through a blend of meticulous research and creative interpretation, we delve into the dark corridors of Wuornos' psyche and the ripple effects of her actions. Early life. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956 in Rochester, Michigan, into a life marked by instability and abuse from the very beginning. Her father, Leo Dale Pittman, was a convicted child molester who hanged himself in prison before Aileen turned 1. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, abandoned Aileen and her older brother Keith when Aileen was just 4 years old. The siblings were left in the care of their grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, in Troy, Michigan. Life with her grandparents was far from stable. Lori Wuornos was an abusive alcoholic, and Britta was emotionally distant. From a young age, Aileen was subjected to physical and sexual abuse. At the age of 11, she began engaging in sexual activities in exchange for food, cigarettes, and small amounts of money, marking the beginning of a harrowing existence on the fringes of society. Aileen's grandfather, Lori Wuornos, was a domineering figure who cast a long shadow over her formative years. Known to be a violent man, Lori was an alcoholic who often took out his frustrations on Aileen and her brother. He physically abused Aileen, beating her for any perceived misbehavior. The emotional and physical torment was relentless, creating an environment of fear and instability. More disturbingly, Lori Wuornos sexually abused Aileen from a young age. This abuse was a traumatic and defining aspect of her early years, leaving deep psychological scars. The combination of physical violence, sexual abuse, and emotional neglect created a toxic and traumatic environment that shaped Aileen's perception of the world and her place in it. Britta Wuornos, Aileen's grandmother, was emotionally distant and largely failed to protect Aileen from her husband's abuse. Britta's own struggles with alcoholism and depression rendered her incapable of providing the nurturing and stable environment Aileen desperately needed. The household was marked by chaos and neglect, leaving Aileen and her brother to fend for themselves in many ways. Aileen moved to Florida in the late 1970s, seeking warmer climates and hoping to escape her past. However, her life continued to spiral downward. She married a wealthy 70-year-old yacht club president, Louis Gratz Fell, in 1976, but the marriage was short-lived. Aileen's violent outbursts led to restraining orders, and the marriage was annulled after only 9 weeks. In Florida, Aileen's criminal activities escalated beyond sex work. She was arrested multiple times for various offenses, including armed robbery, assault, and theft. Despite occasional attempts to hold down legitimate jobs, her volatile behavior and persistent criminal activities made it impossible for her to maintain steady employment. Aileen's relationship with Tyria Moore, a hotel maid she met in Daytona Beach in 1986, was a significant turning point. The two women quickly became inseparable, and Aileen's dependence on Moore grew. This relationship, marked by intense emotional highs and lows, became a central part of Aileen's life. Desperate to support both herself and Moore, Aileen's criminal behavior intensified. It was a chilly evening on November 30, 1989, when Aileen Wuornos first crossed paths with Richard Mallory. Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner, was driving along Interstate 75 when he spotted Aileen hitchhiking. Intrigued by her rough appearance and perhaps seeking companionship, he offered her a ride. Mallory had a troubled past, marred by allegations of sexual misconduct, which would later become a contentious point in Aileen's trial. They drove to a secluded area where Aileen claimed Mallory attempted to rape her. In a fit of panic and rage, she retrieved a .22 caliber pistol from her bag and shot him multiple times. His body was found several miles away, and his abandoned car became the first clue in a series of gruesome discoveries. David Andrew Spears, a 43-year-old construction worker from Winter Garden, Florida, became Aileen's second victim on May 19, 1990. Spears, recently divorced and looking for a fresh start, was an easy target for Aileen's charm. He picked her up while she was hitchhiking along US Route 19. As they drove, Aileen directed Spears to a remote location under the pretense of a private encounter. Once they were isolated, she pulled out her pistol and shot him 6 times. His naked body was discovered the next day, a chilling reminder of the predator lurking along Florida's highways. Charles Edmund Cascadden, 40, was a part-time rodeo worker from Missouri. On May 31, 1990, he encountered Aileen while driving through Pasco County, Florida. Cascadden was on his way to visit family, his car loaded with gifts and personal items. Aileen persuaded him to take a detour to a secluded spot, promising a good time. Instead, she shot him 9 times, leaving his body to be discovered by hunters days later. The brutality of the attack shocked investigators and added urgency to their hunt for the killer. Peter Seams, 65, was a retired merchant seaman and part-time missionary. He was last seen on June 7, 1990, driving from Jupiter, Florida to Arkansas. A deeply religious man, Seams often picked up hitchhikers, believing in helping those in need. When he stopped for Aileen, he had no inkling of the danger he was inviting. They drove for a while before Aileen turned on him, attacking and ultimately killing him. Although Seams's body was never found, his car was later discovered in Orange Springs, Florida. Witnesses saw Aileen and Tyria Moore abandoning the vehicle, leading authorities to link them to the murders. Troy Eugene Burress, 50, was a sausage salesman from Ocala, Florida. On July 31, 1990, Burress was making his regular delivery rounds when he picked up Aileen. Burress, known for his kindness and reliability, became another unsuspecting victim. Aileen directed him to a wooded area under the guise of needing help. Once they were alone, she shot him twice and left his body hidden in the underbrush. His disappearance prompted a search, and his body was found 5 days later, sending ripples of fear through the community. Charles Richard Humphreys, 56, was a retired Air Force major and former police chief who had recently taken a job as a child abuse investigator. On September 11, 1990, he encountered Aileen while driving through Marion County, Florida. Humphreys, a man dedicated to protecting others, became a victim himself. Aileen lured him to a secluded area and shot him 6 times, leaving his body by the roadside. Humphreys' murder struck a nerve with law enforcement, who redoubled their efforts to capture the elusive killer. Walter Gino Antonio, 62, was a trucker and security guard. On November 19, 1990, he was driving through Dixie County, Florida, when he met Aileen. Antonio, described by friends as a hard-working and kind-hearted man, picked her up without hesitation. Aileen, following her now familiar pattern, directed him to an isolated spot and shot him 4 times. His body was found the next day near a remote logging road, the final victim in Aileen's deadly spree. The string of murders along Florida's highways drew the attention of law enforcement. A multi-agency task force was formed to track down the killer. Investigators began to connect the murders through ballistic evidence and the pattern of the killings. The breakthrough came when witnesses reported seeing Aileen and Tyria driving Peter Siems's car. On January 9, 1991, Aileen was arrested at the Last Resort, a biker bar in Volusia County, Florida. Tyria Moore, fearing for her own safety and wanting to avoid prosecution, cooperated with the authorities. She made several phone calls to Aileen from Pennsylvania, where she had fled, urging her to confess. The calls were recorded, and Aileen's confessions were instrumental in building the case against her. Aileen Wuornos' trial began on January 13, 1992, for the murder of Richard Mallory. The prosecution portrayed her as a cold-blooded killer who lured men with the promise of sex before murdering them in cold blood. The defense argued that Aileen had acted in self-defense, citing her traumatic past and the alleged rape by Mallory. However, the evidence, including Aileen's own confessions, was overwhelming. She was found guilty and sentenced to death on January 27, 1992. In the following months, Aileen pleaded guilty to the murders of David Spears, Charles Cascadden, Troy Burris, and Charles Humphreys, receiving additional death sentences. She also confessed to the murders of Peter Siems and Walter Antonio, although their bodies were not recovered. Despite numerous appeals and claims of being coerced by Tyria Moore and mistreated by her lawyers, Aileen's convictions and death sentences were upheld. Life on death row. Aileen Wuornos' time on death row was marked by increasing psychological instability. Housed in the Florida State Prison, she spent over a decade in near isolation. The confinement, combined with her troubled past, took a significant toll on her mental health. Wuornos' letters and interviews from prison reveal a woman haunted by paranoia and distrust. Initially, Aileen attempted to maintain her composure, but the pressure of impending execution and the isolation exacerbated her mental health issues. She began exhibiting signs of severe mental illness, including paranoid delusions and intense mood swings. Wuornos often claimed that the prison staff was subjecting her to abusive treatment, such as tainting her food and water. Her allegations grew more bizarre over time, with claims that the prison authorities were attempting to control her mind and manipulate her thoughts. Paranoia and delusions. Aileen's paranoia extended beyond the prison walls. She believed that a larger conspiracy was at play, involving various levels of the government and even extraterrestrial influences. She became convinced that her execution was part of a grand scheme to silence her. These delusions were compounded by her deteriorating physical health, leading her to believe that her execution was imminent regardless of legal processes. Wuornos' letters to her legal team and supporters reveal a chaotic mind struggling to make sense of her reality. She oscillated between moments of clarity and episodes of intense delusion. Her distrust of those around her grew, including her own defense attorneys. Aileen's belief that her life was in constant danger contributed to her decision to expedite her execution. Expediting her execution. In 2001, Aileen Wuornos made the decision to halt her appeals and accept her death sentence. She wrote to the Florida Supreme Court expressing her desire to be executed as soon as possible. Wuornos stated that she could not endure the conditions of death row any longer and believed that her death would bring an end to her suffering. Psychiatrists who evaluated Wuornos during this period found her competent to make the decision. Despite her severe mental illness, her request to expedite her execution was granted, and preparations for her execution began. Wuornos' determination to die was seen by some as a final act of control over her life, which had been marked by powerlessness and victimization. Execution. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. In her final moments, she declined a last meal and chose to have a cup of coffee instead. Her last words were a testament to her complex and troubled mind. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." Witnesses to the execution described Wuornos as calm and composed, a stark contrast to the turbulent life she had led. Her execution marked the end of a tragic and violent chapter in American criminal history. The story of Aileen Wuornos has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films, each attempting to unravel the complexities of her character and the motivations behind her crimes. The 2003 film Monster, starring Charlize Theron, brought renewed attention to Wuornos' life and provided a nuanced portrayal of her troubled existence. Theron's portrayal earned her an Academy Award, further cementing Wuornos' place in the annals of true crime history. Aileen Wuornos' case continues to be studied by psychologists, criminologists, and sociologists seeking to understand the factors that lead individuals to commit serial murders. Her life story highlights the impact of childhood trauma, systemic abuse, and mental illness on criminal behavior. Wuornos' crimes challenge traditional notions of serial killers and underscore the need for a deeper understanding of the psychological and societal factors that contribute to such acts of violence. While much of the focus has been on Aileen Wuornos, it is crucial to remember the lives of her victims. Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Cascadden, Peter Seams, Troy Burress, Charles Humphreys, and Walter Antonio were all individuals with families, hopes, and dreams. Their lives were cut short by Wuornos' actions, and their stories are a somber reminder of the devastating impact of violence. The story of Aileen Wuornos is a haunting exploration of the darkest corners of the human psyche. It is a tale of a woman driven to the brink by a lifetime of abuse and neglect, ultimately lashing out in a tragic and violent manner. Wuornos' life and crimes serve as a grim reminder of the need for compassion, understanding, and support for those who have been victimized by society. As we reflect on her story, we are compelled to consider the broader implications of her actions and the societal failures that contributed to her path. The legacy of Aileen Wuornos is one that continues to provoke thought, inspire debate, and serve as a cautionary tale of the consequences of unchecked trauma and despair.